Good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be here this afternoon for the launch of Research Week. Just to speak a little bit to what Research Week is about. Research Week is just, we've been doing it for a number of years, and the idea is to showcase the excellent research that happens at the University of Limerick. But it's also an opportunity for people to meet other colleagues, to hear a little bit more about the research, and maybe spark some new ideas. And the other focus of Research Week is to allow us to get to grips with some of the current issues and topics that are impacting on research at the moment. So across the week, you'll hear about a number of those items. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues in the Office of the Vice President of Research for all their excellent work in preparing for this week. And our first session, as part of our launch, is with Professor Mike Quayle. And I met Mike just before Christmas, and we were talking about his success, which I'll come to later. But we figured it'd be really interesting just to have a conversation, to talk a little bit more about how Mike had gotten to this stage of his career. So we'll talk about more of that later on. But just introduce Mike to start with. So Mike is a social psychologist and a full professor of psychology in the Department of Psychology here at the University of Limerick. He's an honorary senior lecturer at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Mike's research explores identity and how active identity production impacts on psychological experiences and outcomes. The topics listed among his current portfolio of projects include developing a network theory of attitudes, misinformation and deep fakes, identity and masculinity, identity and stigma, and health interventions. So Mike was awarded an ERC starting grant in 2018, a proof of concept ERC grant in 2022, and in 2024 was awarded an ERC Consolidator Award. So just need to pause on that. I mean, being awarded 3 ERCs is an amazing achievement. So well done, Mike. We'll talk a little later about your ERC Consolidator Grant, which was for ID compression. And just to say that Mike is also a funded investigator with Lero, the Science Foundation Ireland Research Centre for Software, which is hosted here at the University of Limerick. And he is also a PI on the Marie Scalzi Curie Award Co-Fund Postdoc Fellowship Scheme, coordinated by Lero. So lovely to chat to you, Mike.
Thanks, Norelee.
We were chatting before we came in, and I was listening to you in the earlier session, and you were talking about exactly this. It was the informal elements of the research environment that you find most valuable. And you were saying, for example, about having to be able to knock on James Gleason's door and start that conversation. But you've also mentioned the vulnerability, and we were talking earlier about having the confidence at different time points in your career, or not having the confidence. And all of us may remember a time where we may not have felt that confident knocking somebody's door. So I suppose, how do you get to that point where, what builds that confidence? What got you to that point where you could feel like you could knock on somebody's door and ask them to join, to build that community around you that you describe?
I wouldn't say that I've actually felt that confidence very often. So the times that I have built collaborations, it's often been going to people and asking for help rather than saying, hey, do you want to join my fabulous project? I've never had that kind of chutzpah about my own work. So it's always been about sort of discussing with people a set of ideas that I think are mutually interesting, and I think that they're going to be able to help in some way with the solution. So I found that focusing on a set of ideas that need to be cracked rather than focusing on my own career trajectory has been the key for me, because when you're dealing with the ideas, you don't need to worry so much about whether you're the right person that they should be working with, or you're just trying to crack a set of problems. And so that's been very helpful for me. I've never felt confident enough I wouldn't be knocking on people's doors saying, hey, do you want to join my great project? I would be knocking on their doors saying, I've got this problem. Do you have any idea how we can solve it?
It's a really interesting way of describing it, because it depends on the lens you look at it from. But obviously for you, what drives you to do that is the passion behind the idea and what's the best solution for it, and seeking the best people to join on that basis. But how do you co-create the solution, co-create the project? It's very interesting. I'll move you on if you don't mind, very conscious of time. We could spend hours here now. We won't do that, Mike. You mentioned, and I mentioned some of your projects that you're currently working on as a social psychologist. What do you think are the most urgent from a societal point of view? Or what kind of drives your kind of thinking in that way?
So what is the kind of most urgent social problem?
Yeah, what do you think are the projects you're working on that are really the most, I suppose, pressing?
So I think the kind of general theme of my work is trying to take a complex systems approach to things that in social psychology we would have traditionally studied people as individuals, as independent units, and we know enough now to realize that society is a very complex system, and people don't act individually. So how do they coordinate their opinions? How do they synchronize? How is it that we end up acting somehow like our neighbors without ever having a chat to our neighbors to synchronize it? It kind of happens at this unconscious level. And so how does that happen? And it has knock-on effects for how we understand polarization, immigration, political processes, health behavior. So I think every climate change, everything that's currently considered to be a major problem has this at its heart. How do people coordinate their opinions and behaviors?
Really, really interesting. You're probably explaining that now into your ERC Consolidator Grant, but that's for the project called ID Compression. And the project will develop and test a framework for understanding how identity is written in, so to social information via social interaction. And can you kind of maybe talk me through the ambition in terms of contribution to the field? Like where do you see in 4 years' time, 2029, because you'll start in 2025, of where ID compression have brought us to our understanding of some of those social issues?
So I had to write some notes for myself because I wrote the proposal like quite a while back now, and the project only starts in January. So the basic idea is that interaction is a form of computation. So when we're interacting with each other in social groups, there's actually a form of computation happening where people are simplifying information. This very complex information about the world that everyone has, we're somehow simplifying it down to like, what do we need to communicate to each other? And that performs a computation on the information so that whatever's retained through these conversations and interactions are the things that society is built from in a way. And the idea is that identity is built into those conversations, and therefore identity is built into the information, and therefore the information that we have about our world is like fundamentally imbued with social information. So when someone says they support a particular team, or they say an opinion about electric cars, we can use that, because of the redundancy of that system, we can use that to very quickly locate them in that system. And what identity are you? What are your other values? And understanding that will help us understand how these issues are kind of tied together, not through logic or rational thinking, but through the identities that are woven into the system.
Fascinating, it really is. And I know you describe ID compression as exploring a natural mechanism that might be at the heart of polarization, social information compression. What's that concept, or can you explain social information compression a little more?
So, I mean, something that's compressible is something that's easily summarizable. So if compressible information, if I've got a page of information and you can summarize it in a sentence, that's compressible. So compressible social information would be information where there's a lot of redundancy in it, and you can communicate an awful lot with a tiny little gesture or a little hint to something. So, for example, racism is a highly compressible form of social information because people can gesture to it. They can express that race is an issue here without ever saying it. It's sort of you can gesture to it. How can you do that? Because it's sort of woven into the social fabric in this highly compressible way.
And I suppose linking that then with social media, which strikes me from what you're describing as the ultimate, I suppose, mechanism for compressed information to suddenly have a new platform. It has moved, like as I describe it, the bar stool conversation into a whole arena, and the reach of the person on the bar stool with the opinion is now, so am I right in thinking that some, like you described racism as compressed information, are there other concepts now, or not concept is the wrong word, are there other things now that are now compressed that maybe weren't as much before because social media has enhanced them to be, or enabled them to become more compressed? Do you know what I'm trying to say, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so I think that's the key reason why this theory might be useful. So if you think of, I don't know, 15 years ago, electric cars weren't really politicized, but you can imagine a moment maybe on the horizon when suddenly people will be able to infer your political identity from whether you've got an electric car in the drive, or there's a point at which something is sort of woven into that political structure, and this ID compression framework will help us understand how does that happen. At what point does something apparently neutral get pulled into a political identity? How did vaccination become a badge of political identity? And this framework helps us understand how that happens.
Yeah. It's fascinating when you think about the different issues, like you talk about electric vehicles, vaccines, as you say, now become a political issue, and the mechanism of that's happening. So ID compression will explore, I suppose, how that comes about, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no reason for these things to become politicized. There's something in the way that we're dealing with them in society that makes it very easy for them to get woven into political identities. If you think of immigration in Ireland, until very recently, it wasn't sort of owned by one political identity or another. And we have this moment happening right now where suddenly immigration is becoming politicized, and based on your approach to immigration, your attitudes to immigration, people can now start guessing your identity. That wasn't possible just a few years back in the same way as it maybe will be in a couple of months' time. So you can see this process playing out in real time on these really important social issues.
It's really interesting. And can I take you back to out of ID compression for a moment? Maybe this is still part of ID compression, but your identity and masculinity. And I suppose I was, I have a 13-year-old son and who's just recently got a smartphone. So all those kind of things are coming up for me and wondering. And, I said to him the other day, have you ever heard of Andrew Tate? He kind of looked at me oddly and he kind of didn't know really what I was talking about. So I was really relieved. But there's that whole danger piece. And, you want to have them have their independence, but not. But then in parallel, I was reading about the identity and masculinity, and some boys now saying that they're finding it very hard to even ask questions because it's polarizing. It's already labeling them. It's already their identity. They're feeling like their identity is already formed even by trying to ask questions. And there's no safe space to ask some questions about issues like immigration, et cetera, et cetera. So, is that kind of where that direction of exploring, or which side of masculinity and identity, Mike, is your work looking at?
Yeah, so I'm not doing as much in masculinity at the moment, but I think the ID compression framework, going back to that, does suggest some ways of making it possible to ask questions without, and the trick will be in decompressing things and breaking the alignment between certain identities and certain perspectives. Sometimes it's very uncomfortable to even suggest that as an intervention, but our work on vaccination is quite interesting in this regard, where we found that over COVID and before, the vaccine opinion space is really tightly clustered, that people in what we call the moral majority almost are forced to have extremely clear support for vaccination. Right. It's very difficult to express any doubts at all. And we find if we map out this opinion space, if you do express any doubts, it doesn't position you with the moral majority who in support of vaccination. It positions you with the people who are opposed to vaccination. So those people who have any doubts, those people who want to ask a question, as soon as they do that, they're actually positioned more with the anti-vaxxers than with the pro-vaxxers. So that suggests to me there's actually a problem with the opinion space, where the opinion space isn't kind of robust enough to allow people to have valid concerns like, is there a side effect? Well, it gives you headaches. There are side effects, but you can't ask much about that. You can't push much without being positioned on the other side. Yeah. And that's a problem for society as a whole, but it's embedded in the opinion space in that particular topic and how it links into identities.
It's really interesting and it's quite concerning because you are right, it's that dichotomizing. You either are one or the other and very quickly. And any particular questions you ask, maybe to, we'd like people to question, to ask opinion, to I suppose, affirm their opinion or not. But it's interesting that as soon as you stray in the vaccine space into asking a question, you're automatically in one camp or the other.
Yeah, but it differs across countries. So there are some countries that have like an opinion space that's more open to people being broadly in support or even in strong support and yet also having some reservations. it is possible to have an opinion space like that in a country, but also it's possible for it to become very kind of brittle, that as soon as you express an opinion, then you're seen as not being in full support. Sorry, as soon as you express a doubtful opinion. Yeah.
That phrase opinion space, what's that? How's that constructed? Like what is considered an opinion space?
Well, I mean, that's where we needed help from the mathematicians. So we had this idea in my first ERC grant that people holding opinions form a kind of a social information complex where the people and the information are kind of essentially in the same structure, and that they're positioned in that structure by the opinions they express, but also the structure is created by people collectively expressing their opinions. So it's this dynamic, co-constitutive structure that exists only through constant social interaction. Did that answer the question at all? I feel like I went on a tangent.
But I suppose I'm fascinated because like our way of socially interacting has evolved and changed so much. Have you a sense of how the different social interaction, like if you're somebody who's predominantly in social media, in particular type of social media, versus someone who's interacting and maybe in a more challenging way of interacting, are you meeting the same people repeatedly, even in a physical way, who are reinforcing your views? And I think I know some of these answers, but I mean, I'm knowing that more from nothing scientific or nothing tested.
I think this is a range of, it opens up this range of questions which we haven't addressed yet, but I think are really obvious things to pursue. I think that social media, by limiting the number of characters, for example, and by accelerating the process and by making things public that used to be private, really changed the dynamic, speed it up, make it more likely that things go viral. Whereas in the past, these conversations would be much more dispersed, much more kind of private. Like you would have the conversations would sort of ripple across the country, and the dynamics would be completely different. So I think that there's almost certainly some influence on our social information space that we don't fully understand.
I know, and I'm listening to you because it was like only recently enough, maybe the last few years, that I realized that when I would search for, say, Joe Biden's name in Google, that I would get a different set of search results. Somebody else who Googles Joe Biden's name in Google. I mean, that just blew my mind. I mean, and obviously I know now why that is, but at the time I was kind of naive enough thinking, isn't there just one source of information? But no, clearly it's very influenced by all the algorithms behind and the data and what else I've searched for. But, you know, now we understand that a lot more than we did before.
And not just what you've searched for, but what your friends have searched for. So your position in the social network is one of the key inputs into the algorithm for trying to decide what it is that you might be interested in.
And isn't it fascinating how they work that out? Like it irritates me that social media knows my age, despite the fact that I think I've never revealed it. But, you know, my age doesn't bother me. But, you know, as you get increasingly older, I'm now getting things about children going to leave the nest. And I'm like, no, they're not. They're only 15 and 13. They're not gone yet. But, you know, it's fascinating. They're anticipating you all the time. And, you know, it's really pervasive.
You know, it was research that did this. So those platforms only got to be because of research. So it's like we're in this double-edged sword where we're producing a world which we then need to do all this research to understand, like, what have we done?
What have we done?
Yeah.
What have we done? And do you think the things we should do now to is there something we could do more to anticipate some of those consequences, Mike, do you think, in due course? Or is that just not something we could ever have anticipated, that these are unintended consequences of it?
I mean, the motto of Silicon Valley is move fast and break things. So I don't think they had in their minds that we should try and figure out what it's going to do to us first.
So do you think then, because I think, you know, movements like what's happening around artificial intelligence, some of the European law, etc. I suppose trying to anticipate some of these. I often think just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. But it does.
I do think critical to this is that we need access to data. So I think that's one thing that the EU is doing really well. I mean, they're not doing it yet, but the idea is good that we have to force these big companies to give us data so that we can understand what's being done to us, how is it changing our society. So I think that's really critical.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. I'm very conscious of time, but just a few final things I can think about a little bit about. We've spoken a lot about interdisciplinarity, how important it is for your work. I think you've also spoken about before about, I suppose, the reality of being a researcher. There's risk, there's being vulnerable, there's also good luck, and there's timing. Lots of these things kind of happen in tandem perhaps. But I suppose, how do you deal with kind of that sense of risk? How do you prepare your research team with dealing with that kind of uncertainty in the journey of discovery? Like what is it? It's important that we're able to take risks. It's important that we can't anticipate everything, just a little bit different to what I've just said, but they're much bigger consequences. But in your own research, being open to what you might not know, dealing with that, but yet being forced to maybe fill a form that looks for funding that expects you to anticipate lots more of the outcomes. So a little bit about your thinking about some of those elements.
Okay, I think that's a great set of questions. My main approach would be hedge your bets. So my approach with papers, for example, is I always try and be working on one small one that I know is going to be easy to publish, and one big one that I think, it might have more impact, but it's going to be harder to publish. So you make sure that if the big one doesn't work out, you've at least got like one or more smaller ones in the pipeline. And then weirdly, you actually can't predict what's going to be cited. So the things that I thought would be smaller ones actually get cited much more than the things I thought would be big ones. And of course, the things I think are big are mainly big in my own head, and no one else really sees them as major contributions. So I would say hedge your bets. In terms of research proposals, I always say the best predictor of getting research funding is applying for it. That's the biggest factor. And then after that, there's like, was it a good proposal, and various other predictors. But the main one is like, did you apply? So apply for as many things as you can, as often as you can, and try and get better at writing proposals. So the big risk about research funding is not applying for something that you actually had a good shot at. And that's a risk that people don't normally process. You always think, oh, it's a risk to apply for it, but it's also a risk not to apply for it. I didn't know that the ERC was a big deal. I came from South Africa, and I was just sort of looking around at the research landscape in Europe and thinking, well, none of the Irish grants really suited me. My research didn't fit very well. So there's this other thing, it's called an ERC. I may as well go for that. I didn't realize it was a big deal, so I just went for it. And looking back, I can see, well, it would have been a risk not to apply for it.
And you've mentioned, if you had known it was a big deal, would you have applied for it? I presume you still would have. Or would it have changed your view of it?
It would have changed my view of it. The success rate is better than you think. It's like, I don't know, 13%. I've applied for other European funding where we found out afterwards, like only 2% of the applicants got it. And that's much worse than the ERC. So, I probably still would have gone for it. And I think the more people see other people getting it, the more likely it is that you think, well, that's in reach, actually. And in my own kind of network, I call it the gobshite effect. People look at me and think, if that gobshite could do it, I can. And it seems to be, people seem to be applying more now.
Yeah, I might have a slightly nicer version of saying that, but certainly wouldn't be the gobshite effect. I think it is the rising tide lifts all boats type of thing. But you're absolutely right, that environment piece, and I wanted to ask you a little more about the environment piece. And you mentioned some of these earlier, the informal supports, and that feeds in for me like leadership, and whether some people ever see themselves as a leader in a very formal sense, but even by the fact that you've described you have 3 ERCs, you certainly, I suppose, cast a certain shadow that isn't there without you having that achievement. So what's your kind of sense about even yourself personally as you've evolved in your career, what leadership means to you, or has it changed at all across a number of years? Do you even think about yourself in that leader way? Yeah,
so I don't like thinking of myself in that way. One of my big worries about academia, and especially this little part of it, is that it can be profoundly exploitative. So my number one priority is to try not to exploit the people that I'm working with. And it's a terrible risk as a PI, because young people are sacrificing a lot to be here, and they are putting a lot of eggs in this basket. And you've got to actually work quite hard not to exploit anyone. So I work very hard to try and, in whatever way I can, to facilitate the career that they want to build for themselves. And sometimes that's painful for me because it means that they've put 3 months into a short-term contract, and now they've got the chance to apply for something better. Now I need to support that. But I would say that is the number one thing to do as a PI.
That's very noble of you, and I don't mean that in a patronizing way. Because sometimes
you've got to be able to live with yourself.
You do. You absolutely do at the end of the day. And, you have got to think from the perspective of you're in a permanent role and this person isn't, and they have a life and they have a mortgage or the things they want to do in life. So yes, that is a very difficult decision. But as you say, you've got to live with yourself at the end of the day. Your project will suffer a delay and you've got to take on the burden of finding somebody else. But there are multiple considerations as we do research and the roles that we have and all those elements that I think we have to balance. You probably have far more, I suppose, a sense of leading than you probably ever formally think about. And that's often the nature of what in academia, the collegiality, the academic citizenship. It's often not as formal as we think about it, but it's really important to the environment.
And I think the payoff for that kind of let's call it leadership is that you build a group with a kind of collegiality where as long as you haven't hired any psychopaths, people also take on that idea of everyone in this group is important. People are trying to help each other, trying to support each other, and that kind of supportive environment I think is really important because as we said earlier, academia is a very vulnerable place to be. There's so much rejection. There's so much questioning of, are my ideas good enough? But the question, I always say to people, your voice is as important as anyone else's. Whether you're in your PhD or 20 years out of it, your ideas are just as important as anyone else's. And I think that's the great thing about academia, that we have this kind of horizontal space where anyone can get published. You've just got to get it through the reviewers. So a big part of the job of leading a group is to help everyone believe in their own voice and to build up trust in the group that they know that if they're asking for feedback, when you give feedback, it's not critiquing them, it's critiquing the work. It's building the work up, getting the work to a level, but it's not criticizing you as a person, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And I think that's a key point maybe early in the stage of career, that the earlier people are used to seeing the leader in the group being questioned, and exactly, it's not a critique of the individual, but that environment facilitates that opportunity to be vulnerable and ask questions, because I've seen environments where that's not, and it's very negative and damaging. I started my career as a physiotherapist working in a clinical environment, and the best team I ever worked on, outside of the office of Vice President for Research here at the University of Limerick, genuinely, this other best team I worked on was in palliative care in the hospice in Harold's Cross. And I was a very young physiotherapist, and I learned a lot about myself, which I didn't know until years later that that's what I was learning about. But as a team, they operated entirely, completely equally and on a level, regardless of what your role was on the team, but with the patient and the patient's family entirely at the centre. So it was, I now realise how lucky I was to have had the opportunity to work with that group of people at that point in my life, because it certainly shifted a huge amount in, how I do things and see things. So I think when you can really see that respect for asking other people's opinions, for listening to them actively, and then all the actions related to that fit in. So it's one thing to talk about respecting, listening to people, allowing them to ask questions. But if everything doesn't tally and all of that, Mike, that happens in a team, it's very quickly evident that that's not genuine. Yeah. So I think that's what I was able to witness, was that genuineness of how that was done and followed through every time. It wasn't tokenistic, there was no hierarchy, and you knew there wasn't hierarchy because it was evident in the way questions were asked and the way people's opinions were sought. That's quite important.
Well, one thing that helps in this particular case is that everyone in my group knows things that I don't. Yeah. And it's a product of that interdisciplinary question that we have and the interdisciplinary methods. But everyone knows that there's something that they know that someone else doesn't. Yeah. And that helps a lot.
Yeah, that helps. Yeah. They're quite clear. So from a culture perspective, I was going to ask you about how you create a culture of research excellence and what that sport looks like. So listening to you, that setup of a team where everyone's quite clear that they're bringing some value add, they know what their contribution is. That sounds like a really important part of that. But there must be something what you do as well that looks for how do you get that sense of, well, this is really good work? How do you articulate that, or how does that come through? So it's following your passion, following what you're interested in. How do you, I suppose, instill that sense of, or do you overtly do that, or does it just all those elements come together to make it happen? Do you know what I'm trying to get to, Mike?
I think the system that we're working with makes it's built in already.
It's built in already.
So
exactly.
we have to submit things to journals. We have to get them through review. People are very motivated to do that. I don't have to be telling people, oh, you need to publish something. They've come through a PhD. They're in a postdoc. They want to get a post somewhere. They're already super motivated. I don't need to be cracking a whip.
You're just feeding
my job actually is usually to just slow them down, calm things down, build trust, help people trust in themselves, trust their own voice, and to try and have fun. I mean, it should be exciting doing this kind of work. We should be enjoying sort of asking the questions, trying new methods. It's not actually that much fun. It's always very hard, but there should be some element of enjoyment. And so I think that the excellence bit is sort of built into the system already.
It's the product of it, really.
And my job as a manager is more to just sort of give people the comfort to be able to take risks and apply for things. And
it's fantastic. Yeah.